All right, Satyajit, Professor Chaudhary, let us start. So, namaste, everyone. Welcome to this webinar to commemorate the 100th birth anniversary of Shri Dharampal. I'm your moderator for this afternoon. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Soumya Day, and I recently joined the Rashtriam School of Public Leadership as a faculty. I just completed 2 weeks there. Shri Dharampal, of course, requires no introduction, but let me still go over the course of his life, touching upon the most important pivotal moments in it. And following that, we shall learn more about Shri Dharampal's life and work from our eminent speakers in this afternoon. They are respectively Professor Geeta Dharampal, Professor M.T. Srinivasti, and Padma Shri Jacob Bajaj. Shri Dharampal was an ardent Gandhian in his youth and participated in the individual Satyagraha movement, which had its inception in 1940, as we know. Later in the decade, in the late 1940s, around the time of partition and independence, he worked for refugee rehabilitation while being in charge of the Congress Socialist Party. Post-independence, he worked to empower rural communities and founded a village cooperative near Rishikesh. From 1958 to 1964, he served a stint in the Association of Voluntary Agencies for Rural Development. Thereafter, he was Director, Study and Research of the All India Panchayat Parishad until 1965. He was closely associated with Jayaprakash Narayan in this period. 1966 onwards, Dharampal began to exhaustively delve into archival material pertaining to India in the British Isles. He was located in the United Kingdom at that point. The eventual result of this effort were 3 seminal and extremely important volumes: Indian Science and Technology in the 18th century, Civil Disobedience and Indian Tradition, and the beautiful tree, Indigenous Indian Education in the 18th century. Dharampal, through his archival researches and the books he authored based on them, did some crucially pioneering documentation of the Indian knowledge systems and practices prior to the establishment of British rule. His scholarship in simple language, maps and registers as to what the British faced in our country, erased in our country when they brought it under their rule, under their thrall. So without further ado, I hand over the floor to Professor M.T. Srinivasti. He is currently chairman, Center for Political Research in Chennai, and he will speak on the theme Science and Technology in Pre-British India. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Is this visible, my slide?
I can see it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Oh. Okay, sir. So, thank you very much, Dr. Prabal Rai Chaudhary, Dr. Soumya Day, Geeta ji, and Rishi Hood University for asking me to speak on Dharampal ji's work on science and technology. I think there's nothing new I'll be saying. I've said this in perhaps a few talks earlier, but maybe there will be few students here for whom this will be new. So I'll go through the material in the next 15 minutes. So this is the book, Indian Science and Technology in the 18th Century. This is the republication in 2021, last year, in the Dharampal Classic series. The book was first published in 1971 by Impex India. It was the first of Dharampalji's books based upon the materials he had collected in the course of his extensive study in British archives. So it compiles articles by British officers, scholars, etc. on Indian sciences such as astronomy, mathematics, and various technological practices in medicine, metallurgy, agriculture, etc. There are 6 articles on science and 11 articles on technology. Especially the articles on technology were those which describe practices which to the European observers of that time seemed to offer promising ways of improving the corresponding technologies in Europe. Coming first to the articles on science. So the first article is an important article by Sir Robert Barker. He is a military man, but he visited Varanasi in 1772. And then he is taken to this Man Mandir Ghat, in which stands this observatory. And he reported that this observatory was constructed 200 years ago in an article that got published in the Philosophical Transactions in 1777. In fact, the Man Mandir was recognized, as Dharampalji notes in his preface, as one of the 5 celebrated observatories of the world by Encyclopedia Britannica in all its editions till 1823. Now, this observatory was further developed by Raja Jai Singh, Raja Savai Jai Singh of Ambere or later Jaipur during 1720 to 30, in which period he also constructed 4 more observatories, Delhi, Jaipur, Ujjain and Mathura. So this is what is called on the left is called the Samrat Yantra. On the right hand side, what we call the Digamsha Yantra. Both of them are to measure current time and the celestial coordinates of planets or stars. I'll say something more about Raja Jai Singh because this may be interesting in the context of the later discussion that Dharampalji, the points he's making about the Indian science and technology currently and how it was in 18th century. So this is the photograph of the Samrat Yantra in Delhi. As you can see, this is about 70 feet tall. And this is what is called the Jayaprakash Yantra and Rama Yantra. This is the Rama Yantra. These two are the Jayaprakash Yantras in Delhi, what is called the Jantar Mantar in Delhi. Now, people who have studied this observatory recently, in the last 30-40 years, they have reported that the accuracy of this Samrat Yantra, the Digamsha Yantra, and other Yantras of Jai Singh are up to 1 second of an arc. And this is indeed what is known as the very limit of naked eye observations. As you know, telescopic astronomy, which came in late 17th century, changed the nature of all these things. We should know something about Raja Savai Jai Singh himself. He becomes a king somewhere around 1705 or 6 in Jaipur, by which time he starts studying traditional texts of Siddhantic astronomy, perhaps through his teacher, Samrat Jagannath. And by 1720, he sort of becomes a very important king in North India. He has considerable power over Delhi, and he gets jizya abolished in Delhi, who obtains land for constructing these observatories in Delhi, which is completed by 1725. He builds this new capital at Jaipur during 1727 to 34, which is built on the principles of traditional Indian architecture under the Sthapati Vidyadhar Bhattacharya. He performs Ashwamedha Yajna. In fact, he's one of the most important rulers in North India at the time he passes away in 1743. As regards astronomy himself, by 1716 itself, he starts writing a commentary on Surya Siddhanta. His teacher, Jagannath Samrat, translates important works in Persian and earlier Greek works, and he writes new books on the instruments that Raja Jai Singh and Jagannath Samrat devised. The Samrat Yantra and Jayaprakash Yantra, Rama Yantra are in fact new instruments that they designed. And he has written works in Sanskrit. Now, Raja Jai Singh gets also the European tables of De La Hire translated. He sends a team to Portugal and gets this latest 1727 edition of De La Hire, gets it translated, and then he does various observations, and he writes to the Jesuits saying, your tables and my observations, they don't seem to agree. And so there are some problems with your tables also. So apart from updating the traditional Indian texts of astronomy, Raja Jai Singh is looking at both the Persian texts of the Ulugh Beg period and the current modern astronomical texts, including the De La Hire tables. And even in the Sanskrit text, the same point is emphasized by Jagannatha, that he compared the tables of the Yamana Granthas and the older Indian texts, and there were discrepancies. So he got new instruments constructed, and these are the new instruments. And then in various works that he did, he has discussed the problems of the lack of compatibility between these texts and the observations he is making. So he was in the process of updating Indian astronomy, something that sort of bringing it up to date, etc., a point which we will take up later. Coming back to Dharampalji's book, so it cites a 1793 article of Williams, Robert Barker's article in 1777, about this observatory in Benares. So this Williams is writing that this monumental observatory was never used. And then he also says it was perhaps not capable of being used for any observations at all. And he quotes some traditional Pandits in Banaras to say that this is what they are saying. Now, Dharampalji adds one more comment looking at this observatory in 1970s in his preface, that the observatory looked even in more dilapidated condition in 1971 than it was perhaps 200 years ago, except that a few plates have been fixed in various places to indicate the names of the various yantras. And then Dharampalji states that one of the 5 most famous observatories of the world being in this condition is really unfortunate. The counterparts in other countries are being cherished to serve as the repositories of their respective astronomical knowledge. But this, I think, a photograph of the Benares Observatory. And here you can see the Samrat Yantra, and here you can see where they have constructed the compound. And this is something called the Nadi Valaya Yantra. The Digamsha Yantra is somewhere this side. Anyway, the second article of Dharampalji's book is an article of Playfair, very long article. It's a review of a French work written by Jean-Sylvain Bailly in 1787. Bailly got a few tables of Indian astronomy. He obtained it from Thailand through the ambassador, French ambassador there, and some more texts were sent by the Jesuits in India to France. And then Bailey comes to the conclusion these tables are based upon an epoch which is 3102 BC, which is called the Kali Yuga epoch in India. And he says, as far as the data of 3102 BC is concerned, the data seems to coincide very well, even with the modern calculations, including the improvements done by Newton, Lagrange, Laplace in astronomy. So, and Playfair seems to sort of agree with what Bailey is saying. But all this was to change over the next 2-3 decades. By 1830, Europeans conclude that there was nothing ancient about Indian astronomy. Today, of course, we know there are very detailed records of ancient observations going back to 3000 BC in the Vedic text. These tables and the epochs are a different issue anyway. Another thing, Playfair says Indians have forgotten much of their astronomy currently, though their books are very good. But Dharampalji refers to this Legentil, who was a French astronomer who had come to Pondicherry to make observation of transits of Venus. And there, Legentil gets one eclipse in 1765, calculated by an Indian astronomer, and then he compares with the calculation as done by the tables of Tobias Mayer. And then he finds that the Indian method gives the duration of the eclipse 41 seconds too short, the tables of Mayer 1 minute 8 seconds too long. Legentil also says this method of calculation in Indian text appears to be more advantageous. The word Tamil method one need not be confused. There was some confusion at that time, and it continued among European Indologists till 1970s, that there was some distinct Tamil method of astronomy. It was later on shown to be what is called the Vakya method, which was prevalent over most of South India. And as regards the prevalence of mathematics knowledge, in fact, within about 10-15 days, years of the work of Playfair, John Warren, who is cited in the introduction to by William Blanpate to Dharampalji's book, The Foreword by William Blanpate. So he writes a book called Kala Sankalita, where he is saying that Indian astronomers that he met knew these infinite series in mathematics and things like that. And later on, a person called Charles Wish even writes a very detailed article about these advanced mathematics. Another science article in Dharampalji's book is the article of Colebrook, where he is discussing that Indians are solving complicated equations called quadratic indeterminate equations in number theory, which are studied only in advanced college algebra today. And these solutions were rediscovered in Europe, according to Colebrook, in 18th century by Lagrange and others. And he thinks Indians have something which is similar to that. Actually, the studies by Indian mathematicians in 20th century showed that the old Indian method called Chakravada, which is discussed in Bhaskaracharya's Bijagadita book of 1150, is indeed much more optimal. It's 30% more faster than the method that was discovered 800 years later by Euler and Lagrange. The articles on technology and Dharampalji's book are much more important. The mathematics and astronomy of India was looked into by scholars of Europe even after 18th century because they had wanted to see how these kinds of subjects developed in India. And this debate about the ancientness of Indian astronomy or otherwise carried later into 19th century. Whereas the articles on technology, which were written in 18th century and early 19th century, they were in fact reporting things which were new to the Europeans then, or more interesting or novel to the Europeans. And so there was no controversy about them. They were there for all to see. There are 11, so they got forgotten over the period of next 100, 200 years. Of these 11 articles, 2 are on inoculation, a method that was practiced by Indians against smallpox. 3 articles are on specific materials like making of ice, making of paper, making of manufacture of the making of mortar. Then there are 2 articles on agriculture and 3 articles, very important articles, on Indian ways of making iron and steel. So this is this drill plow, which was thought of to be a 18th century invention in England. It was late 17th century invention in Europe, which was widely used by Indian farmers. In inoculation, which was not known to Europe till about early part of 18th century, it was first taken to Europe by the British ambassador to Turkey. This, according to Holwell, who was governor in Bengal, who writes a very detailed paper on the Indian method of inoculation. And he says that this was done by physicians coming from various colleges in Vrindavan, Allahabad, and Banaras. These Vaidyas went around the country, village to village, collected a very, very nominal fees, and did this inoculation. And then this was so successful that even 1 in a million does not get the infection afterwards. And then they had a theory of the origin of smallpox infection. And this method of inoculation, taking it from inactivating an old virus from the last year's smallpox infection, is something very similar to the kind of vaccination that was practiced in India against COVID, the one that the Indians came up with called the Covaxin. Vaccination is and the word vaccination is a misnomer. It comes from the word vaka, cow. The inoculation is the correct word which we should have used, because Jenner discovered this new method from the cowpox. All the inoculation methods are generally called vaccination today. Anyway, the indigenous method of inoculation was banned from around 1803. Then there are descriptions of plastic surgery and the cement that was used to fix the nose back in plastic surgery, and that was taken back to Europe, sent by Dr. Helena Scott. The Indian practice of treating surgery for cataract was also discussed. The important articles are on iron and steel manufacture, and from South India to Central India to Western India, there was widespread reports of manufacture of iron and steel. And Dharampalji estimates that there were 10,000 furnaces in India, each producing about 20 tons annually. And this production would have been much larger than perhaps production in whole of Europe. The quality of Indian steel, known as woods, was highly appreciated, as we shall see a few minutes later. The processes of iron metallurgy were highly efficient in terms of fuel use per unit of metal produced. So there even continues to be some interest in studying the old processes of manufacture of iron and steel of India. The steel of India is also called Damascus steel, because this was the one exported to Middle East also. A preliminary survey that I made of about 150 articles which are there on Indian iron and steel, we see that there are about 20 articles belonging to 18th, 19th century, about 40 articles written in 20th century. These are all scientific investigations on the processes of manufacturing or the properties of Indian iron and steel. And there are about 90 articles written in the last 2 decades. So these are the diagrams of the furnace that was used. These are the bellows. These are the furnace diagrams that you can see. Now, Faraday's collaborator, James Stoddart, is writing in 1813 that the woods steel of India, the name woods comes from the Tamil name Urukku or the Kannada name Ukku for steel. It is the best that I have met with. In fact, this is also the statement that Dr. Helena Scott wrote when he sent a sample of these woods in 1795. And then this Pearson, who is reporting his experiments on this piece of woods that Dr. Helena Scott sent, is quoting Helena Scott to say that Helena Scott says this Indian steel has harder temper than anything known in that part of India. And so this is the way that instead of saying reporting harder temper than anything that we are acquainted with. So this kind of statements, in fact, this was said about Indian discovery of infinite series. So on every aspect of Indian sort of achievements, this is the kind of reporting that these observers are doing at the same time when they are reporting on them. Now, Dharampalji has in his preface has explained how these processes, both in the methods used in science and the processes used in technology, were in tune with the Indian indigenous political order, the decentralized politics of India, and the initiative of all these sciences and technologies lying at the local level. And he tries to say that these were quite contrary to the kinds of methods that Europe was beginning to work out in its modern era, the modern scientific and industrial evolution era. But the Indian methods, though they were declared as crude by the Europeans, they appear to have the optimality, they appear to have a high degree of sophistication and an acute sense of aesthetic. Now, anyway, all this was to go, it went by the administrative policy of the British rulers, and also by this kind of opinion that Macaulay decried all Indian sciences and all Indian knowledge systems. But even more so, the Indian proponents of modern education, like Rajaram Mohan Rai, they also said that we should stop learning all of ancient Indian learning and we should start learning everything from Europe afresh. So it is this kind of a situation that led to the complete eclipse of Indian sciences and technologies. Dharampalji says India was undergoing a slow resurgence in 18th century after the end of Aurangzeb. But all this led to complete, the European domination led to complete eclipse of Indian sciences and technology. And what we started doing in the colonial period under the British hand-led rule and under their implanted education system, we continued the same mechanism of transplanting some of the technologies, sciences, knowledge, learning from Europe, including the organization and even the purposes for which they were used elsewhere. And it's largely due to that, Dharampalji says, that though Indian scientists and technologists may be as creative as the corresponding people in the West, or even better, the impact of science and technology on larger society in India is minimal. And it's perhaps no exaggeration to add that the field of science and technology in India, as far as it concerns its ordinary life, is only little less barren than India's taste system and politics. Finally, Dharampalji says that borrowing ideas is not something new. Indians have always done, and so have other civilizations like Europe or West Asia, things like that. But the past centuries' unthinking transplanting of European science and technologies have resulted mainly in retarding and blunting indigenous innovation and creativity. And such innovation and creativity can arise only when you can think of this new knowledge to be something in continuity, something that grows upon the knowledge that you already have, the new technology to be something that you are adding to your great cultural heritage of technology. And for that, a comprehension of what prevailed in India is very essential. And I think one of our main errors in post-independent India has been that we have not even documented, we have not even studied, let alone think of our modern sciences and technologies being our practice or our endeavors there, being in continuation with this great tradition of Indian science and technology. So the lesson that Dharampalji is saying that we have to acquire such a comprehension, and his book was one of the earliest attempts in trying to plead on Indian academia, Indian intellectuals, and Indian planning, Indian administrators, etc., to start this process. Maybe today we will be in a position take that exercise, we should look at all the source texts, all the inscriptions, all the texts, all the material artifacts and remains of Indian sciences and technologies, and the current surviving practices of those traditional practitioners. We should look at all the foreign reports in various archives all over the world, and the current studies that people outside India have done, either of the text or of technologies or the experiments they have made. And this has to be a very legitimate and important exercise that our institutions of higher learning will have to do. I think India will have to soon work out a way of at least acquiring a quick comprehension of our tradition in science and technology, so that we will be in a position to think of our progress in science and technology. We would be, as a continuation of our great tradition, we would be in a position to introduce some creativity and innovation to all our studies, and perhaps also restore some relevance of all that efforts to our current problems and the needs and aspirations of our people. Thank you very much. I think I have taken a few more minutes than I should have taken.
Thank you very much, sir. That was an extremely illuminating overview of Indian metallurgy, medicine, and astronomy prior to the advent of the British, as well as Shri Dharampalji's conclusions, observations on Indian science and technology. Now I request Padma Shri Dr. J.K. Bajaj to kindly take the floor. He is currently Director, Center for Policy Studies at Chennai, and he will speak on the beautiful tree. Sir.
Thank you, Soumya. My colleague Prabal Rai Chaudhary, Satyajit, I'm seeing. For some of us here, yesterday and today have become kind of Dharampal marathon. Yesterday we had a nearly 5-hour seminar on Dharampalji's works. Today in the morning, Geeta ji arranged a recollection kind of meeting for Dharampalji. And now we are having this interaction, the Rishi University. This is, of course, necessary because Dharampalji, we are celebrating the 100th anniversary of Dharampalji. He was born on 19 February 1922, and today we are meeting on 19 February 2022. And but this coming together of ours, celebrating him in the manner we are celebrating him, it is important in itself, but it should lead to all of us getting together to carry the work that is started forward. Yes?
Sir,
you think something?
Extremely sorry to interrupt.
Sir,
we cannot see you, sir. If you can.
But my video is on. My video is on. So why is it not coming through?
Now you are visible. Now you are visible.
I'm not visible to myself right now. Okay. Okay. Now I'm visible. Okay. So as I said that our celebrating him in this manner fairly widely through the country. Yesterday there were about 200 participants. Today in the morning there were about a large number of participants, and today I see besides the panelists several students, and amongst the names, amongst the attendees, I can see some very important people. Our coming together should lead to all of us getting together to carry forward his work. I'm making these remarks because when MD Srinivasti was showing the various slides from his science and technology book, and every time I see those slides on metallurgy and steel of those beautiful small furnaces that Indian people were so efficiently working with, I always wonder that it was in 1971 that Dharampal showed us these furnaces and all. And those people who, some of them who used to work with those furnaces were alive in 1970. They were perhaps alive, and certainly we came across some of them in the later years. Some of them may be alive even today. Now, these furnaces obviously seem to be very well designed and very well capable of being used for creating specialty steels, for which we spend a lot of money, lot of foreign exchange we spend, but we were the people who have the technology to make small amounts of steel in very efficient manner and very controlled furnaces. I always wonder that what is the point of looking at all this? Of course, it gives us a feeling of pride and honor in our past, but not using it for our present somehow seems to be such a waste that you're talking about it, and all these technologies that British were looking at those technologies to use those Indian technologies to improve their own technologies of that present. And if we do not use these technologies, search for them, look at the archives and see more of them, and start using them for making our present technologies more competitive, more efficient, more innovative, then I don't think we are paying due respect to what Dharampalji taught us. This is a diversion. Let me come back to the book on education that he wrote. And in this case also, I will try to present this work in a way that let us see what we can do. He is telling us what indigenous education was before the British came. While learning about that, if we do not innovatively use what is the kind of education that is talked about there for improving our education today, then it is to an extent a waste of all this effort. This book, Beautiful Tree, was written partly to provide facts and figures for a statement that Mahatma Gandhi ji had made when he had gone to England in 1931 in the context of the Round Table Conference. In one of those speeches there, he had said, "I say without fear of my figures being challenged successfully, that today India is more illiterate than it was 50 or 100 years ago, and so is Burma, because the British administrators, when they came to India, instead of taking hold of things as they were, began to root them out. They scratched the soil and began to look at the root and left the root like that, and the beautiful tree perished. The village school was not good enough for the British administrators. So they came out with their programs and their departments and their textbooks and whatnot." Now, this name of the book Dharampalji has taken from this statement of Mahatma Gandhi, that Indian education was a beautiful tree whose roots the British scratched out from the earth and left them to rot, and the tree decayed. But that metaphor doesn't apply to Indian education alone. This is all of Indian society, all of Indian civilization was a beautiful tree with a very rich foliage, with immense several branches. And the British did dig out the roots of all of that, scratch the roots of all that. And after having scratched, they left those roots in the open to dry out. And with that, they hope that the beautiful tree of Indian civilization will also wilt. It doesn't happen that way. Civilizations are very resilient entities, and a civilization like India has shown its resilience repeatedly. And if philosophers are to be believed, civilizations are not only physical attributes, they are ideas, they are the ways of being of people. And to actually destroy a civilization, it takes much more than just scratching the roots. That faith we should have, because this civilization is not going anywhere. It will reassert itself again and again and again. And this civilization produced Dharampalji in the 1970s. He wrote books like this. That itself is a proof. That itself is an evidence that this Indian civilization is not going anywhere. This beautiful tree is not going to perish, whatever the efforts people make. Now, again, let me come back to this, what Dharampalji has told us about indigenous education in this book. That I can see two people in this audience and amongst the panelists who have done PhDs on this book, and they would be able to say much more about this. Ankur Kakkar is there, Prabal Roy Chaudhary is there. But let me quickly summarize what Dharampalji has done in this book. This book contains the documents of a survey that Thomas Munro, who was the governor of Madras Presidency, ordered to be carried out between 1822 to 1826. This was a very detailed survey. The governor's office sent a detailed questionnaire to all the collectors of the Madras Presidency. And there was a tabular format in which the data had to be provided about the number of schools in the district, the number of students disaggregated according to caste and community, the number of teachers, the subjects taught. So this is like any modern survey that will do. But it covered a very large area, covered the whole of Madras Presidency. And Madras Presidency at that time covered whole of what is Tamil Nadu today, much of what is Karnataka today, and almost all of coastal Andhra, and at least half of Odisha, the lower part of Odisha. So it covered a very large area. Dharampalji has put together the complete data, all the reports and the tables that were received from the collectors in that period in this book. Then he has given us extracts from Adams' reports about education in Bengal and parts of Bihar. These reports are from surveys done between 1835 and 1838. And he has given extracts from G.W. Leitner's History of Education in the Punjab. That is 1865. This is later than the earlier, the other two, because Punjab came under British rule much later in 1850. Now, all these three surveys, all these extracts from the other surveys, and this survey of Munro establish the following. First, what is being established is that school education in India was extremely widespread in that early period of 1820s and before that. That was what Mahatma Gandhi was saying, that India is more illiterate today than it was 50 or 100 years ago. This actually establishes that the spread of education in the early 19th century through the indigenous system of education was much, much wider than the British were able to establish up to 1931. Probably will know the numbers, but actual numbers are not important because this is a period when, as most of the collectors are saying, when much of the indigenous system is already, because of the presence of the British in 1820, it would have been already several decades that the British would have been ruling over these parts of India. So as the collector is saying, the system is already highly decayed. But even then, the impression that Munro himself gets, or the impression that Adam gets, or the impression that Leitner gets, that is almost that the school education is nearly universal. Adam puts it most strongly, where he says that there was one school in every village. That 100,000 schools in Bengal becomes very famous, one of his statements. And he's saying that according to his calculation, there must have been one school for every 30 school-going age students. And if you have a school for every 30 school-going age students, obviously you are managing to enroll everybody. So that's the first thing that this Dharampalji's book, the data collected in this book tells us. The other lesson that one gets from this book is that this data is that this system of education is not limited to any particular section of Indian society or any caste. The question should not have arisen because if you are talking about universal education, obviously everybody is covered. But as I said, the tables formats that Munro sent to the collectors required them to put the number of Brahmins, number of Vaishya students, number of Shudra students, number of Muslim students separately. And from those figures, from those tables, you can see that across these categories of caste and across the categories of community, the students are spread fairly evenly according to their population. There is certainly this education was not limited, was not iniquitous, not limited to any particular section of Indian society. In fact, Adam gives a list of teachers in some of the areas of Bengal and Bihar according to their caste. And that list of teachers with the caste listed, it reads like a census list of castes from the 1930s or nearly a census. Up to 1930, the census used to make a list of castes. And this seems to cover almost every caste, including Chandalas, including Mairas, including the carpenters. All kind of teachers come from almost every caste. There doesn't seem to be any distinction made from where the teachers should come and not come. So that is the second part. And both of these issues, that education was widespread, then education was equitous, that it covered everybody, are important, but they were important when India was trying to rebuild education in India. We have already rebuilt, and now in terms of enrollment, we are at the same stage. It has, Mahatma Gandhi said, they'll challenge you to do this in 100 years. It has perhaps taken us 100 years to ensure universal enrollment in India. And Mahatma Gandhi normally is very perceptive in these matters. But we have been able to achieve 100% enrollment. That is true. So those issues are now of historical relevance and not so much of issues of current policy decision making. The third thing that we learn from these books, from these documents collected here, is that all these observers, the collectors, Adam and Leitner, all of them see that this society has great respect for education. In fact, this Leitner puts it the most strongly. He says, respect for learning has always been the redeeming feature of the East. To this, the Punjab has formed no exception. Torn by invasion and civil war, it ever preserved and added to educational endowments the most unscrupulous chief, the avaricious moneylender, even the freebooter, vied with the small landowner in making peace with his conscience by founding schools and rewarding the learned. Rewarding the learned, founding schools was always an act of great virtue in Indian society. It has been, continues to be so even today. But Leitner is saying that there could not have been a village, a gurdwara, or a mosque, or a temple, which did not contribute to educating people, educating children. And that's what would have led to this kind of universal education, because all institutions of society and all sections of society were keen that learning is important. Students need to be taught. People have to be literate. And when I go through documents, I always get surprised that how did the idea that India was an illiterate society before the British, how did it even arise? Because this is a society which has an extraordinary respect for learning. Even today, I remember I went to a small village in Andhra Pradesh, now it must be in Telangana, which is a temple of Saraswati. And I saw a huge crowd of young children being brought there to begin their learning at that place. And this would be happening everywhere. Nobody, in India, learning is serious business. Vidya is serious business, which is deeply etched in our mind. So that was the third thing. Respect for education in society is the third thing which is established by the documents collected in the Beautiful Tree. The fourth issue that these books tell us something about is the kind of books which were used in school teaching. I think Ankur Kakkar has gone through those lists carefully. But essentially, these books are the books that normally any educated Indian reads. Those are books with which you start teaching your children. You write it for the children, but this is what the society needs to learn. And so the books are not separated from the general literature that the society is being read in this society. If the arithmetic books are something which resonate inside the society. So those books list should be looked into. The fifth point which emerges from these documents, and which Adam puts it very strongly, and some of the collectors put it very strongly, is that there is that table that Munro sent to the format of the table that Munro sent to the collectors, asked them to also write down the number of years that the students spend in the school. And so it is generally, it seems, 5 to 7 years. And it is the general impression of everybody, all observers who are associated with these documents, reproduced in Beautiful Tree, that children, once they came out of the school in 5 to 7 years, they were all efficient in literacy and numeracy. They could carry out, as Adam puts it, they could carry out the business of their society efficiently. They were well trained to do it. The kind of mathematics, arithmetic that is required. In fact, I don't repeat, tell us different ways, different kind of mathematics, arithmetic that children from different sections of society were taught. Those who were to do agriculture and those who were to do trading and those who were to do crafts, they had different kind of numbers and operation ways of operating with numbers. But what all of them saying is that 5 to 7 years of school learning made them fully literate, fully functional, numerate members of their society. And Adam is saying that he has not seen this happening in the schools of Scotland. And it doesn't happen in the schools of India today. Children do come out of 8th standard, even after 10th standard, without having acquired foundational numeracy or foundational literacy. I'm taking a little more time, but this morning I saw a news item where a teacher of English in Karnataka, this great issue of hijab is going on. And in Tumkur, some teacher has sent a letter of resignation. She's a teacher of English to her principal. She's a teacher of English and she has been teaching there for 3 years. You please have a look at that letter of resignation. I am not concerned with the issues that they are raising. Not one sentence in that letter of resignation is complete. And in good English, the whole letter doesn't make any sense. That is the kind of education in our schools that you're getting. And this documents collected in the beautiful tree tell us that this was not happening in the indigenous education system that we had. Finally, Adam and some of the collectors go in great detail about how the numbers were taught and how the letters were taught to the process of teaching and what we call pedagogy. And that in itself is very important. That I will not talk too much about that today, but that pedagogy that these schools had, that was the pedagogy which continued even in the modern school education system up to the 60s or perhaps the early 70s, which we have removed from our school system. We have replaced even the instruments that we used for teaching and writing with the notebook and this. In fact, at some stage we replaced the notebook and slate with this books, printed books in which the children were supposed to fill in the. Now, in the time when I was studying, and I think the earlier times, anybody writing, desecrating the book on printed book, sacrilege. And since we started doing this, I see that much of the students who come from our education system, they do not know how to maintain their books and notebooks respectfully, because we have taken away this respect in the process of teaching itself. So why I am saying all this is that this book, the Dharampal's Beautiful Tree, is about the past, a past of education, but it has a lot to tell us about what we need to, about the present of Indian education. Since this, I am speaking in a university and there are scholars here, I will suggest that the last three issues that I raised, the issue of what kind of books, textbooks to use in the school, the issue of how to ensure that foundational numeracy and literacy is imparted to the students who complete their school, not up to the middle school. Actually, it should be done by the end of the primary school, but at least at the end of the middle school it is achieved, and some study of the kind of pedagogy which is appropriate for making children numerate and literate in an efficient manner, as Mahatma Gandhi is saying. Some major research work we should begin in all these three aspects. How do we make our textbooks align with our society? How we ensure that our students from the schools come out numerate and literate, and make them respect numeracy and literacy? And how do we, what kind of pedagogy is appropriate for that? Whether the earlier pedagogy, which is described in this beautiful tree, has something to teach us. We need to do a lot of research on that. I hope while we are celebrating Dharampalji and talking about this issue, it will lead to some research in the directions I have indicated. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, sir. That was extremely illuminating. Thanks for introducing us to the picture of the beautiful tree that of Indian education in the pre-colonial times that Shri Dharampalji reconstructed, retrieved through his researches. It definitely fills me, and I hope the rest of the audience, with a sense of loss, because we realize as to what precious, enormous civilizational heritage we lost. Now I invite Professor Geeta Dharampalji to kindly take the floor and reflect on the life and the memories of Shri Dharampalji. She is currently Dean of Research at Gandhi Research Foundation in Jalgaon. Ma'am.
Thank you very much. I would like to apologize for not being there at your very special event right from the beginning, but I had some other commitment here. I'm deeply moved by the fact that you have arranged or organized this special event. Although I myself do not know you, and I have never had the privilege of visiting Rishihood University. Maybe you did get in touch with me at some stage, but I'm very, very pleased that you have taken the initiative to organize this event on the very special day, the birth centenary day of my respected father. I would like to offer my respectful and most cordial greetings to all eminent and distinguished persons gracing this event. These are accompanied by my sincere gratitude to the other two prominent speakers, Professor M.D. Srinivasti and Dr. J.K. Bajaj, and especially to the organizers and the students and faculty of Rishihood University. Especially my special thanks are to Dr. Soumya De from the School of Public Leadership, and to our dear friend, I must say, Dr. or Professor Prabhal Ray Chowdhury, Head of Department of English at the sister Nivedita University in Kolkata. It is very good to be able to share this online program with you. I also greet other close associates of Dharampalji who are assembled here today to join this very special online celebration of the birth centenary of my respected and beloved father. For me, it is a true privilege to be his daughter. I have been asked to say a few words as personal reminiscences about my father from a daughter's perspective, a task that is not too easy in such an august public forum. But since I have at previous occasions engaged with his scholarly contribution, and my comments in this regard have also been published as an introduction to his essential writings, therefore it does seem opportune for me to comply with this request today in celebration of his birth centenary. Dharampalji has become an iconic personality for many successive generations in post-independence India. First and foremost, because his extraordinary historical contribution has revolutionized our understanding of the subcontinent's cultural, social, political, technological, and scientific achievements at the eve of the British conquest. Indeed, he has initiated an intellectual Swaraj. But to understand how this became possible, let me attempt very briefly to trace his life story and draw your attention to some defining personality traits that enabled him to have such an impact. Firstly, throughout his life, he was deeply inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, of whom he caught a glimpse at the Lahore session of the Indian National Congress in 1929, when he was just 7 years old. In fact, he genuinely considered himself to be a child of the Gandhian era. More than a decade later, although he was a brilliant student and was about to be admitted to the prestigious engineering college at Roorkee, he had the courage and indeed the audacity, against the wishes of his family, to abandon his BSc in physics to join Gandhiji's Quit India movement as an underground member of the All India Congress Committee run by Sucheta Kriplani. Then, after being released from prison, rather than continuing his association with the flamboyant side of the Swaraj movement, he decided to engage in rural reconstruction. Together with Miraben, Gandhiji's British-born disciple, in a small village near Rishikesh, away from the exciting drama that was unfolding in the metropolitan centers. This was because he, though only in his early 20s, already understood the crucial importance of regenerating community structures for building a new India. But then at partition, he felt compelled to interrupt his efforts at community revitalization, and being put in charge of the Congress Socialist Party Center near Delhi for the rehabilitation of refugees from Pakistan, together with Kamla Devi Chattopadhyay and Dr. Ram Manohar Loya, his organizational skills and empathetic understanding for the plight of his fellow Indians came to the fore. At this juncture, his practical creativity also received expression in his co-founding the Indian Cooperative Union together with Lakshmi Jain and others. Then, towards the end of 1948, though being a staunch patriot, but not at all chauvinistic, he decided to travel to Israel to see if the kibbutzim system could serve as a model for the ongoing Indian village reconstruction. Quite amazing, really. But destiny intervened, and due to the closure of the Suez Canal, he had to reschedule his sea voyage via England. There in rural Devonshire, at an educational post-war camp, he met and soon married Phyllis, my mother-to-be, a remarkable English lady who shared his humanistic communitarian vision, which transcended not only nation-state boundaries, but also challenged conventional norms. Returning to India with his young bride, choosing the overland route, they finally visited Israel and stayed at the oldest kibbutz, Begania Aleph. But very perceptively, he realized that the kibbutz's artificially regulated communitarian lifestyle was not suited as a model for the Indian rural environment, which was much more organic. This judicious ability to be selective and to decisively reject alternatives which he considered inappropriate or not viable was one of his defining traits. And a few years later, he made the same decision regarding the emerging rural community of Bapugram near Rishikesh, Miraben's idealistic project, from which, however, after 4 intensive years, he dissociated himself, for he considered the community to be an artificial creation. A lot more can be said about this, but above all, what it highlights is his ability to be detached and to have no qualms about rejecting what he considered as non-viable options. Needless to say, this could be somewhat disconcerting for people with whom he was working, and for the family, of course. A later prominent instance was his resignation in 1964 as General Secretary of AVAD. This was the Association of Voluntary Agencies for Rural Development, which was founded by Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay in 1958 and presided over by Shri Jayaprakash Narayan. His resignation was because he was categorically not in favor of this NGO, the first of its kind, receiving foreign funding for Indian rural projects. This was a principled stand, having dire consequences for the family's sustenance, but his deep convictions overrode any pecuniary or monetary considerations. Other examples of his taking a principled stand took the form of hard-hitting written contributions, one of which was his first major publication entitled Panchayat Raj as the Basis of Indian Polity, criticizing the failure of the Constitution for not incorporating indigenous grassroots political and administrative structures. This rightly constitutes the first volume of the reprinted Dharampal Classic series released last February in 2021. Another example was his open letter to the Lok Sabha, of which you see the first page here, calling for Nehru's resignation due to his mismanagement of the Indochina debacle in 1962. His subsequent arrest, along with the other 2 co-signatories, N.N. Datta and Roop Narayan, and their imprisonment in Tihar jail, caused great consternation in the family, but in the public sphere, it initiated a much-needed debate about the definition and need for patriotism, the deconstruction of the personality cult, and the importance of freedom of speech in a democracy. Another defining talent of his was his ability to juggle quite dexterously traveling and living with very limited financial resources between India and England, and managing to raise a family with 3 children. But of course, this was only possible due to the supportive compliance of my extraordinary mother. But then in the mid-1960s, he experienced his Agni Pariksha, so to speak, namely by transforming a family tragedy in London, my brother's almost fatal road accident through which he incurred severe brain injury, into an opportunity for remapping recent Indian history, the details of which are well known. But let me briefly explain the contextual side. Compelled to relocate to London to provide his much needed support, as my brother began recovering, my father got involved in meticulous archival research, single-handedly, having no formal historical training and without any official funding, into early British colonial records. And these represented for him the only valuable legacy of the British Raj. Indeed, since he was convinced of the fundamental viability of Indian society, inspired by Gandhiji, he was intent on refuting the deeply ingrained conventional view of India being a degenerate and dysfunctional society at the eve of the British conquest. And in this, he succeeded magnificently. as testified by the reprinted volumes and numerous other publications, and by the two presentations of Dr. Bajaj and Professor Srinivasti. For me as a teenager living in London, it was flabbergasting to experience at close hand his incredible zeal and commitment, spending 10 hours day after day in the archives, meticulously copying by hand the documentary evidence, then on returning home, typing it into his Olivetti typewriter so that he could send off carbon copies of his precious findings to friends in India. And when governmental response was lacking or non-committal, not giving up, he succeeded in subsequent decades in impacting generations of young minds, enabling them to rediscover India, being reassured of the vitality of Indian society. Today, inspired by his example, we, his heirs, are called upon to continue his work with renewed vigor in manifold ways as appropriate for our expertise. Our efforts at revitalizing India would be a befitting tribute to Shri Dharampal ji in celebration of his birth centenary. Thank you very much. And I have some more details for you with the following links. They can be easily clicked on, and I can leave this with you so you can share it with anybody who's interested. Thank you very much indeed. Next slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for those recollections. They truly, genuinely brought to life Shri Dharampal ji as a person, as a human being, and we discovered him in his multiple dimensions, his hopes, his trials, tribulations, and the magnificent effort that he put in to retrieve, to recollect Indian heritage as it was prior to the establishment of British rule. So this brings us to the end of today's webinar, and now I invite Professor Prabal Rai Chaudhary to kindly give the vote of thanks. He's a professor and head of Department of English at Sister Nivedita University, Kolkata. Professor Chaudhary, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shomode. And at the very outset, I would like to thank, congratulate, and pay my respects to Professors Dr. Geeta Dharampal and Dr. M.D. Srinivasti. Professor M.D.S. has just left due to some urgent commitment on his part, and our sincere thanks to Padma Shri Dr. J.K. Bajaj ji for agreeing at such a short time to be part of this webinar. But let me assure to all of you and to the participants present here that this is a small beginning of a long journey that we have put together and tried to initiate. And we will be putting our efforts, our commitments to doing, I should not use the word grand, but something that will initiate larger discussions, disseminations on Dharampalji's work, on the corpus, and on the initiatives he had taken to redefine Indian historiography and how Indians should look at a time that's not very distant from our own. If I remember correctly the words of Mahatma Gandhi, Gandhiji has said that we were under British occupation for 75 years and it would take us at least 150 years to get out of the evils of colonialism to independence. And I think we have a long way to go to rediscover ourselves, to recollect ourselves, to redefine and recollect ourselves, to go forward and have a defined Indian worldview, so to say. In this journey, Dharampalji's works, his inferences, the corpus he has put together will be an extremely important apparatus to understand, to look at, to read, to comprehend, and discuss. With these words, I would like to thank the organizers in Rishihood University, Professor Geeta-ji, Dr. Bajaj-ji, and Professor M. Srinivasti for making it possible to make this a small beginning in paying our collective tributes to Shri Dharampalji on his centenary, on his birth centenary. Thank you so much.
And let me thank you, Professor Rajchodri, for playing a pivotal and instrumental role in making this webinar today a reality and a success. So I seek your permission, I take your permission to close this webinar now. And once again, I reiterate our thanks to Professor Geeta Dharampalji, Professor J.K. Bajaj-ji, and Professor M. Srinivasti. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating and making this event a success. Thanks a lot. Namaste, everyone.